What's up, guys? Hello, Footballtalk here. We're closing out the first half of my annual divisional draft and roster review series today, where we've already looked at the NFC and the AFC North, plus the NFC East earlier this week, and now we get to the Bills, Dolphins, Patriots and Jets today. Very different teams in terms of where they are roster construction-wise, and that's the whole purpose of discussing every single draft class and offseason for these teams. I'll give quick snap evaluations of each player selected by each of the four teams, discuss how they fit within their approach to building those rosters, and some other notable moves in regards to it, what those teams are telling us short and long term. To close out these videos, rather than handing out draft grades, I will rank how big a fan I was of what they did in the draft in particular, in relation to all the other moves they made. As always, instead of BSing you guys on 3 or 4 guys for these videos that I didn't get to in my studies, I'll simply pass along some key info on those. Just real quick before we dive in, please do me a favor and hit the like button if you enjoy this type of content. Feel free to also hit the bell and follow along all off-season. I have either a video or article coming out pretty much every week. The link to my site, hellosofootballtalk.com, for all my content, and timestamps for the 4 teams discussed today are down below in the description. AFC East time now, with the Buffalo Bills here first. Right off the bat, Buffalo did a lot of maneuvering around the board, as they originally started with only 7, but ended up making 10 selections, after having sent a second rounder to Chicago for wide receiver DJ Moore. They did get a late second back as part of how they approached the draft early, moving back 3 times from 26th overall, 11 picks back from late day 2 to the very top of day 3, and then getting back picks 66, 125, and the 2 final 7th rounders essentially. So good job by General Manager Brandon Beane for just maximizing the available capital, even though I'll get to a questionable move here in a second. As for the players they spent it on, so 2 second rounders, 35th overall TJ Parker, the edge out of Clemson, and 62nd overall Davis Nick-Benoson, the cornerback out of Ohio State, 3 4th rounders, pick 102 Drew Bowery, offensive tackle Boston College, 125 Scala Bell, wide receiver UConn, and 126 Caleb Elam's-Orr, the linebacker out of TCU, a pair of 5th rounders, pick 167 Jalen Kilgore, safety South Carolina, and 181 Zane Durant, interior D lineman out of Penn State, and then 3 7th rounders, pick 220 Toriano Pride Jr., cornerback of Missouri, 239 Tommy Doman, the punt out of Florida, and 241 Amaj Reed Adams, interior offensive lineman out of Texas A&M. As for TJ Parker here first, a former top 50 national recruit and true junior, who at 6'4", 260 pounds can really punch and lock out in the run game, frequently creates angles to the ball and squeezes through tight creases as he rips through the reach of blockers, which also shows up in some late wins as a pass rusher, where he combines an explosive first step with the forward lean to really test the anchor of tackles, working off the long arm, but does want to soften the outside shoulder for himself with stutters and shimmies, trying to win cleanly with his hands. His change of direction after shooting up the field is slightly delayed, and I don't think he has that quick burst to run down NFL-level athletes anyway, and he gets into too many head-to-head battles without any reliable counters he can access at this point as a pass rusher. So he didn't take the step people were hoping for when people were mocking him into the top half of the first round last summer, but wouldn't have been shocked at all if he was the pick at 26 either. Maybe a little bit curious at that this is the type of player that they targeted here after moving back, considering they handed Bradley Chubb a 3-year deal of nearly $50 million annually, with quite a similar profile to go with Greg Rousseau and Michael Hecht as these bigger bodies on the edges. I personally would have liked to see a little more juice from that spot, swaying away from what they've had there previously, but the player is in line with where I valued him, and you hope he can look more like his 2024 self, which I feel better about considering he still kept battling all of last year, unlike some other guys on the Clemson defense. Davis Nick-Benoson, the Ohio State corner, is a player I was significantly low on, and he actually sent an extra 6th rounder to Denver for a move up by 4 spots here. A long, feisty outside corner who wants to really throw off and trust receivers at the line of scrimmage and pressman assignments, and has quality long speed. Typically doesn't allow offenses to pull him off his line marks in zone coverage, and aggressively punches through the hands of the intended target. And he's a competitive hand fighter that disengage from blocks, come to balance, and wrestle ball carriers to the ground. But as I've said a few times, he was a walk and talking flag in 2024, whose hands and feet aren't always connected still, and he got grabby with receivers or interfered before the ball arrived at the target this past season as well, even if he didn't draw cloth for it. And he just plays too upright, where he ends up off balance at times, moving around in zone coverage, and blockers able to get on his chest. Former Falcon D. Alford is the only player other than Chubb who I just brought up that Buffalo paid over $5 million annually to this offseason on a 3-year basis, who likely was considered their Teron Johnson replacement in the slot, To go with Christian Benford as the second highest paid defensive player, and last year's first round pick Maxwell Hairston. I'm not quite sure where that leaves us, for what new defensive coordinator Jim Leonhard wants to do exactly, and if Igbenogsen's skill set will be tapped into with more press alignment than his previous Buffalo staff, because at his best, this guy is now your number 3 outside corner here at the end of the second for at least a couple more years, so that is curious to me. As we move to the top of day 3, there's Jude Bowery, the Boston College tackle, and since they weren't going to take a gamble on the falling Tennessee corner Jamal McCoy, since they just had selected one, they slid back one more spot here with the Raiders in exchange for a 7th rounder next year. Bowery was a team captain with prototype measurables and athletic traits for the position, explosive out of his stance to create movement in the run game, particularly on inside zone calls, and regularly washes linebackers out of the lane. Jumps into his pass sets to get to his landmarks, while keeping his path square, striking and pulling those hands back to throw off rushers, but then has big time grip strength when he does get into those wrestling matches. He dips his head into the contact in the run game and gets caught too far away skis at times as reps go along, and his timing and placement of his punch are still up and down, to where he often presents a soft outside shoulder and the elbows end up way too high. So unlike some other people, I definitely believe he could develop at least into a quality swing tackle, and maybe they go back to more 6 lineman sets based on what he could provide getting momentum rolling on combo blocks. But right now, I don't think he should get onto the field a whole lot, based on him getting run by for 3 sacks in the actual Senior Bowl game, I believe. So there's some things to work on. But then we get to Scalabelli, UConn wide receiver, who is very strategic as a route runner, slow playing off the line, then hitting DBs with sudden bursts after lulling them to sleep, and generally shifting gears. Consistently friendly to his quarterback out of his breaks, and dramatically cut down his drop rate from previous season to under 4% last year, with more consistent framing of passes. And then he was a weapon for the Huskies, who they put the ball into his hands in various ways, where he can sharply change directions, apply well-timed stiff arms, and his quality contact balance to bounce off glancing shots. He likes the control he plays with, but too many of his routes lack real urgency, and needs to become more physical with hand fighting. And while as an invested blocker, too often he ends up catching hard-charging defenders, and also takes the worst of bigger collisions typically with that smaller frame as a ball carrier, which led to 2 fumbles this past year. Bell combined with DJ Moore now makes the receiving corps feel quite a bit more dynamic. Hopefully Joshua Palmer can stay healthy again and act as some kind of sacrificial X, as Matt Harmon from Reception Perception so aptly refers to, because all of the other guys are best deployed off the ball, and Bell is very similar to Khalil Shakir in how much he can move around the formation, so he may be that guy's direct backup, and they could get them both on the field together in obvious passing downs, putting defenders in hell running option and jerk routes. Caleb Elam's-Orr from TCU is a well put together linebacker with an impressive physical profile, who shows good vision and has continued to improve as a tackler, but relies more on information his eyes show him than the instincts to field play development. Does well to adjust his spacing and zone coverage based on the distribution of routes and defensive rules, and he put together some good production thanks to his motor as a pass rusher, but will need to do a better job of attacking half the man and not getting hung up on blocks as much, but only being bested by Ohio State's super freak sounding styles among the position in the 40-yard dash and the vertical jump at this year's combine, and logging a massive 53 defensive stops last season, a pretty strong selling point towards the end of the 4th year. So if Terrell Bernard or Dorian Williams miss any time, he'll probably get right on the field for Buffalo, since the other backer Joe Andreessen, Buffalo Joe, is pretty much viewed as more of a special teamer, without the type of physical upside. Jalen Kilgore, the South Carolina safety, I outlined as one of my biggest steals in the entire draft. As part of my big draft recap, I'll directly read this off. This young man won't even turn 22 years old until his rookie season is already over. He started all 3 years with the Gamecocks, being in the freshman All-American, then leading the SEC in interceptions with 5, and defending 12 passes this past year as a team captain. He easily carries 210 plus pounds, has 33-inch arms, ran 4 for flat at the combine, and by no means is just a great athlete out there on the field. Playing that star role for most of his college career, he's fundamentally sound at taking on and getting around blockers. He understands his assignments in zone coverage, while already beating quarterbacks into some throws. And although some foot fire at the line left him in quicksand occasionally, he has far more outstanding reps of staying in phase way down the field with speedy slot receivers. That's a pretty wild profile for someone in this range. Buffalo signed free agents CJ Gardner-Johnson and Geno Stone for a very affordable $5 million for the season, but that should prohibit them from getting Kilgore out there on the field if he's the more gifted player, especially as that third safety they put in the slot, in case they need a little more physical presence, defending the run, or covering detached tight ends. I think he'll massively outplay that draft slot once he finds ways to take other guys off the field. Zane Durant from Penn State is definitely undersized for D-tackle at 6'1", 290 pounds, with sub 32-inch arms, and still has to refine his skills at deconstructing blocks so he doesn't get washed out of his gap at times. And he's too much of a reactionary pass rusher at this point, trying to peek around the guy across from him, rather than actually getting around them with well-delivered moves. But an elite athlete at the position who brings a lot of force to win his gap and disrupt the backfield in an attacking style front. He's a dynamic lateral mover to execute stunts and punish offenses for not transitioning on twists with necessary urgency, and his edge-to-edge rushing skills give interior pass protectors trouble if left on an island with Durant, since he can also just power through creases when presented to him. So again, I thought he capitalized on a player that fell at least like 50 picks further than his profile suggests he should. Maybe not the type of D-tackle the Bills really needed here, since even for as massive as Deontay Walker is, as an early D3 pick from them last year, he's not a style presence edge-shade nose, and they already have Ed Oliver secured as the penetrating free technique. But maybe he's a partner for him on passing downs, and to come in when banged up or needing a breather certainly makes sense. Toriano Pride from Missouri is a slightly undersized boundary corner, but not lacking any confidence. Even if his man gains a step on him early, Pride has the wheels to win it back and not lose vertically, as he led his position with a 4.32 in the 40 at the combine, twitching his movements as a zone defender and supporting the run, where he's disciplined with not surrendering contain, but does have that smaller frame and will be outboxed by some bigger bodies on the perimeter, while having very little experience in the slot. Plus his footwork isn't particularly well coordinated, while his anticipation angles as a zone defender to contest the catch point also need work. Goes back to the corner discussion, another guy who almost exclusively played outside, and there's no real path to get on the field for him anytime soon, unless you look at him as almost an exclusive coverage play on special teams due to how quickly he eats up ground. Tommy Doman, the Florida punter, somewhat surprising since they did bring back Mitch Wishnowsky for another year, but clearly are looking to potentially upgrade. Doman is actually really tall for a punter at 6'5", with the long kicking motion, previously at Michigan, averaging close to 44 yards per punt for his career, with quality hang time, but maybe not equal control of how the ball deadens when it hits the ground at this point. And finally, Marsh Reed Adams, the Texas A&M guard, 6'5", 330 pounds, yet quick out of his stance to erase the gap to defensive linemen on angled blocks, regularly is first to establish meaningful contact with his hands as a pass protector, and strains to keep a firm interior of the pocket. However, he doesn't yet maximize the force he can provide as a run blocker, as his base can get a little narrow, he stands up fairly quickly, occasionally gets his feet stuck in the turf as he steps towards a shaded rusher, and is put in recovery mode against crossface moves. So he has a ways to go, but did make it work to be a quality starter in the SEC, and it's plenty of upside to still tap into with the right development, which they curiously signed both Austin Corbett and Lord Cushenberry this offseason, even if it's at just below $3 million combined, who both have primarily lined up at center, where they did also bring back Connor McGovern, and selected Cedric Van Prank Granger on day 3 last year, so Reed Adams may not be ready to go out there on the field as a rookie, but he finally is the only true guard on his roster outside of Buffalo's starting tandem, after allowing David Edwards to walk in free agency, and yet I don't know if he's going to be active on game days. So other than Ekpenosa at the end of the second, and maybe wanting a little more juice from the edge rusher they targeted up top, I can get on board with pretty much everything Buffalo did here, trading down several times to acquire extra picks, and betting on impressive physical profiles that later got into the draft. They're continuing a pretty defense-heavy oriented approach that they already started last year, with a couple of potential quality rotational pieces on offense added to it in the middle rounds. Clearly they continue to want to swap up pieces from that unit after they released cornerbacks Teron Johnson and Dane Jackson, safety Taylor Rapp, along with wide receiver Curtis Samuel. They did re-sign Jamal Hamlin for another year, who, for as inspiring a figure as he is in that city and community, certainly was part of the program last season, and I actually posted a video on the massive issues in run defense especially by the middle of it, but I am curious about what this unit looks like under the new leadership of Dream Leonard. It doesn't really need to be said that as long as Josh Allen is the quarterback, the expectation is that they're competing for the AFC, yet they couldn't capitalize on as open a road as it ever felt like last postseason. And if I had one critique point for what they did with the first 2 picks, I'm not sure if they added true difference makers, which has been the big thing missing for them at times in the past. Next up, the Miami Dolphins, who put together a massive draft class with 13 names, a pair of first rounders to start here, 12th overall Caden Proctor, offensive tackle / interior all-lineman out of Alabama, 27th overall Chris Johnson, cornerback San Diego State, 2nd round pick 43 Jacob Rodriguez, linebacker Texas Tech, 3 third rounders, pick 75 Caleb Douglas, wide receiver Texas Tech, 87 Wilkes Merrick, tight end Ohio State, and 94 Chris Bell, wide receiver Louisville. A pair of 4th rounders, pick 130 Trey Moore, edge defender / linebacker out of Texas, and 138 Kyle Lewis, linebacker / safety from Pitt. Then 3 5th rounders, pick 158 Michael Taft, safety from Texas, 177 Kevin Coleman Jr., wide receiver Missouri, and 180 Seydou Traore, the tight end from Mississippi State. In round 6, pick 200 DJ Campbell, interior offensive lineman Texas, and round 7, pick 238 Max Llewellyn, the edge defender out of Iowa. Alabama's Kid Proctor was a surprise selection at 12, but they did acquire a pair of late 5th rounders from Dallas to move down just one spot for, after I thought they could have very much used the culture piece to build around like Ohio State safety Caleb Downs, which was the pick for the Cowboys. As for Proctor, I did view him as a reach here, but of course it's easy to get excited about what he could become at this level. This is a massive left tackle with 3 stumps for quads and bulldozing qualities, but doesn't always capitalize on those because he tends to get top heavy and loses balance in the run game if his hands aren't connected. There's good rhythm to his kick set, he's patient with sorting out different fronts and post-up movements, with very solid lateral agility for a man his size, although he resorts to leaning into or hugging rushers who have a step on him up the arc, making him susceptible to late counters. Yet if he gets into those close combats, he has vice grips for hands to lock up defenders, and it appears that he'll be the designated starter at left guard, to go with Jonah Savaiinaea, who they traded big capital for to move up in the 2nd round for last year, but unfortunately was one of the worst starters in the league last season as a rookie, so he maybe have a short leash for this new coaching staff under Jeff Hafley, with Jamari Salyer as a swing guard with tackle flexibility currently, as they basically swapped with the Chargers for Cole Strange in free agency. So at 12, when he missed the guard and Penn State's Big Ione was available, I can't really give a thumbs up to that. Chris Johnson, the San Diego State corner, who they moved down a good round from a late D2 selection for, in order to jump up 3 spots here, but the original 30th selection was in return for wide receiver Jalen Waddle from Denver, along with getting a 3rd and a 4th round swap in the favor. Johnson has patient, soft feet to mirror receivers off the line, incredibly oily hips to not lose phase, and after some concerns around his long speed, based on the competition he faced, he largely mitigated those by running a 4.4 flat at the combine, shows excellent spatial awareness, instincts as a zone defender, and click and close ability to deny easy completions, and is fundamentally sound with keeping a wide base, staying on his feet, and getting ball carriers to the ground as a tackle against perimeter runs. He did almost exclusively line up at left outside corner, and showed very little when it came to putting hands on receivers and dictating terms to them, while his recovery speed when beaten is below average I thought, which showed up on some bad losses over the first couple of days of Senior Bowl practice. Miami allowed Kate Akow and Jack Jones to walk in free agency, so that room really started to look thin, where Juju Brents is the most established name among that group, and otherwise you're looking at a bunch of former late-round picks competing for snaps, so they really needed help, and other than concerns about level of opponents that he's faced, there's reason to feel very good about him being a quality starter right off the bat for Jeff Hafley's zone-centric system. Jacob Rodriguez, the Texas Tech linebacker, I talked about as one of my guys pre-draft, thanks to his mental processing skills and instincts for the position, which really show up in creating run stuffs, shows no hesitation when it comes to blowing up personal protectors as a blitzer, but also hits them with quicks off that, and he punishes quarterbacks for testing them in coverage by tracking the eyes and drifting into passing lanes, along with overall being a turnover machine who specializes in the peanut punch, being involved in 13 takeaways last season. I'd say the short area burst is a lot better than the speed out to the sideline, and he'll need to clean things up as a tackler, where too often he still leaves his feet and tries to drag down runners. But he just swept basically every award that he was eligible for last season, other than the Heisman, where he still finished top 5 in voting as an off-ball linebacker. Not that I viewed this as a primary need for this team, but pairing him with an all-pro level guy in Jordan Brooks, that's suddenly a sick tandem for them. Caleb Douglas, the Texas Tech wide receiver, unfortunately was one of the bigger reaches of the entire draft I thought. They needed to add some size to that room, with Douglas being a primary outside receiver at 6'3", 200 pounds. I like how he sells the drive phase of routes, not just off defensive backs, and fights through holes to draw flags, or just get to the spot that he's required to be at. Plus he consistently works back to the football, and is hyper aware for where the first down marker is, fighting for conversions, but needs to do a better job of eluding contact early, gaining stack position on the corner, and creating clean entry points for passes. Plus he frequently dropped balls that he took his eyes off a little early, and only having a 31.5-inch vertical really limits his ability to go up and win aerial battles. I like some of the things he brings to the table, and I'm sure offensive coordinator Bobby Slowick and the rest of that group appreciated his blocking, but this was my wide receiver 31. And we'll shortly skip the tight ends that would come up next here for the other wide receiver selected in round 3 in Chris Bell from Louisville, who has a legitimately powerful frame for an NFL X receiver, is pretty sudden off the line and quickly accelerates out of his stance, drops his weight and is able to stop on a dime with the balance to shake off tight coverage and strength to create the late separation from tight coverage, and along with improving his drop rate every year, he became nearly unguardable in back shoulder fades in 2025, along with being a monster after the catch thanks to his speed and strength to break for tackles. I'd say he mostly creates openings for the ball than he truly separates, not providing a certain level of quick twitch for underneath routes, and he needs to do a better job of latching his hands and actually sustaining blocks on the perimeter. But I thought without tearing his ACL, midway through this past college football season, he was pretty much a lock for the top 50, and he may be the most talented option for free agent quarterback Malik Willis straight away, who happily brought along with him from Green Bay. Even if you swap these two guys, that's way too early on Douglas for me, although I do understand that they clearly wanted to add more size to that room, and they could get plenty of work as rookies already. Wilkes Merrick from Ohio State is an old-school wide tight end who can be that extension of your offensive line and allowed the Buckeyes to play a lot of 12 personnel with more of a detached second tight end. His fundamentals, play strength and grit as a run blocker are all borderline elite for a college tight end, and along with being able to build up pretty good top-end speed, if you give him a runway, he has those big sticky hands and a no-nonsense mindset after the catch. He didn't look as comfortable fluidly adjusting on the fly on leap blocking duties on the move like his teammate Max Clare in 2025, and he ran a very limited route tree at Ohio State with almost no work out of the slot and little tape trying to make sharp cuts while instantly getting chopped down after securing the grab on most of them. The Finns re-signed Greg Dulcich this offseason to be the primary pass-catching F-type tight end for slightly over $3 million this year, so Kuzmarek as the more traditional Y in 12 personnel sets makes a lot of sense. But for as much as I liked Ohio State's TE2 for that role, it certainly came with attacks considering an eerily similar profile for the division rivals in the Bills in Jackson Hawes was a 5th round a year prior. Due to the sheer amount of names, I'll speed things up quite a bit here as we get to day 3. First with Trey Moore from Texas, who split time pretty evenly between on and off the ball last season, with the strength to stack and shed, but also being able to get skinny around blocks, and his best converting speed to power as a pass rusher, but also has some wiggle to him to sidestep guys coming from off the ball, and he's a physical presence in coverage with surprisingly loose hips, has plenty of room with his skills to deconstruct blocks in the run game and not overrun plays at times, and he doesn't yet pack a deep bag of pass rush moves or stacks them on top of one another in a particular cohesive fashion at this point. This was after letting go of Bradley Chubb, as I already mentioned with the Bills bringing him on board, and right now Miami has a bunch of these smaller, speed-based edge rushers in Chubb Robinson, Josh Uche, and David Ojabo, but they needed someone who can set the edge in the run game and maybe offer more of a power element rushing the passer. Kyle Lewis from Pitt is another guy highlighted as a steal in my big draft recap, definitely undersized for a full-time linebacker role, with little experience and too often getting covered up when asked to play between the tackles. And the acceleration part pops, but the pure mass simply is lacking to actually power through running backs as a blitzer, but makes use of those 32-inch arms with how he keeps blockers at bay and works off them for tackles from the overhang spot. His change of direction skills and ability to carry routes vertically as the talent develops are excellent, and his closing burst and flexibility can make him a problem knifing through gaps as an add-on rusher. Interested in how much big nickel packages they tap into, because this is the best option in the slot right away, I believe. Michael Taft from Texas is a safety that supports the run from depth with the appropriate patience and is capable of handling box duties. You can tell that this guy studies film and helps out his teammates with his communication skills on the back end, and does very little wasted movement in his transitions while being physical at the catch point, but he tends to overrun plays in backside pursuit and lunges too much as a tackler, while he may not have the raw speed or fluidity for extensive man coverage assignments in the slot. Yet for this safety room, I'm not ruling him out starting over Dante Trader or Lonnie Johnson week 1. Kevin Coleman Jr., the Missouri wide receiver, has drawn some Zay Flowers comparisons with the little dynamo he is in how much his offense revolved around putting the ball in his hands. Quick accelerator off the line to put safeties on the heels, and catches the ball with soft hands when he creates openings in front of them, and he instantly gets vertical after the catch, where he's insanely shifty to make people miss, but he's short with modest long speed and I believe a slot only, and too often his routes are curved rather than precisely executed, so he'll need to cover the role among a bunch of smaller receivers who, outside of the rookies, all need to be playing off the ball largely. Seydou Traoré, the Mississippi State tight end, really cool story as a former standout soccer goalie in London before coming to the US 5 years ago, and had that great moment where he's walking out of the draft room with the British flag around his shoulders, brings that quick burst to run away from safeties on crossers, and can stick his foot in the ground pretty well to change directions, had a drop rate of just 3.3% over his final 3 seasons, and he's pretty elusive after the catch, but really raw as a route runner at this point, and may also be more of a big slot than anything you can rely upon as an inline blocker at any time soon. At pick 200, the Texas guard DJ Campbell, who's built like a fridge at 6'3", 330 pounds, with massive quads, but also 34-inch arms, snatches up linebackers on the move, to where they seem helpless trying to get off contact, and regularly stalls big interior rushers who think they can go through him in protection, but he leads excessively with his pass in the run game and will be punished more regularly in the NFL by arm overs, and he forces himself to flip the hips rather than sliding laterally, as he's mirroring active movers one-on-one on the inside. And lastly, Max Llewellyn from Iowa, who packs a hefty punch and is sudden to slip off blocks as the ball carrier approaches. 32% of his career tackles resulted in a loss, while he's fast and furious with his hands, and he's known for a tornado-like spin move, often off stutter steps once he gets opponents to kind of stop their feet. Yet he is overly reliant on it as a pass rusher, while otherwise you see a lot of arm swing and wasted movement. And he's a subpar athlete on the edge with shorter arms, who doesn't diagnose the action particularly well yet, is more of a designated player on passing downs until this past season. It'll be an uphill battle for these last 3 names to establish themselves as part of Miami's roster, but pretty clearly there's an open competition for several spots, and if those 13 names weren't enough, they also signed an undrafted free agent safety in Indiana's Louis Moore, who I actually like better straight up than the one selected in the 5th round, and you can read up more on him as part of my article on Impact UDFAs, along with several other names I believe have a strong chance of earning roster spots. So this could be a massive overhaul in 2026 already, and they are far from done when it comes to building out this thing in the image of Jeff Hafley and GM John Eric Sullivan, both coming over from Green Bay, where they are much more focused on size in the trenches and physicality, rather than being obsessed with speed as his previous regime. I can't defend the Caleb Douglas selection in round 3 and question the approach of taking Caden Proctor at 12, but I love Jacob Rodriguez, Kyle Lewis was a steal in the 5th, and generally like the approach of volume shooting as we think about how long a road it'll be to figure out a capable 53 to compete within this division especially, which includes the large UDFA haul. Team number 3 now, the New England Patriots, who in round 1, 20th overall started with Caleb Lomu, the offensive tackle out of Utah, round 2, 55th overall Gabe Akers, edge defender out of Illinois, round 3, 95th overall Eli Raridan, the tight end out of Notre Dame, in round 5, pick 171 Karan Prunty, cornerback Wake Forest, a pair of 6th rounders, pick 196 Demetrius Crownover, offensive tackle Texas A&M, and pick 212 Nnamdi Obiasor, linebacker TCU, and then 3 7th rounders, pick 234 Baron Morton, quarterback Texas Tech, 245 Jam Miller, running back Alabama, and 247 Quintavious Hutchins, edge defender Boston College. Lomu is a fluid, well-coordinated lateral mover in the zone run game, and when it comes to advancing to the 2nd level, graceful athlete when he gets out in space and turns the bodies of small targets as part of the screen game, clearly has the quick feet to beat pass rushers off the edge to the spot and stay in front of them throughout reps. He doesn't pack the force in his hands to create knockback, and that initial momentum to truly displace defensive linemen in the run game, and there's a little bit of disconnect at times between his upper and lower half, with some tendencies he needs to clean up in terms of punch timing. Yet combining his agility and coordination, he has some impressive reps of recovering when initially beaten, and this creates a pretty interesting juxtaposition where it'd be, but how does Lomu come along with his development if last year's 4th overall pick does continue to struggle and this is your best solution for the left side? Or is Lomu still inexperienced enough to reteach him at right tackle if Morgan Moses does finally start to fall off heading into year 13? So I like the player, but I'm interested to see what the plan is here. Gabe Akers, the Illinois edge, they saw sliding and decided to jump up 6 spots for, in exchange for a late 4th rounder and a 6th with the Chargers. Slightly oversized edge defender, who's been a team captain and leads by example with the rugged physicality and motor that he displays, shoots his hands into the chest, rolls his hips, and extends through in order to reset the line of scrimmage, and he bullies tight ends. While for a man who's played between 260 and 285 pounds at different times, His get-off stands out, he regularly shortens the arc for himself by digging into the frame of tackles, and his motor never stops running, often chasing down random quarterbacks way off his landmarks. I thought he might fall a little bit, because some teams could view him as a tweener, who needs to do a better job protecting the outside shoulder if he's going to be in a full-time edge role, and he's more of a one-speed rusher, who doesn't yet reliably access counters on time, where too often they felt like a last resort, rather than a proactive second phase of the rush. Draymond Jones was New England's biggest out-of-house addition, at 3 years $36.5 million as part of this year's free agency cycle. Akers profiles quite similarly as that plus-sized edge, even if he's not as experienced with reducing inside on passing downs, but both great fits in combination with the more speed, bend-based Harold Landry, and we may see all three of them on some 5-0 fronts to go along with the chaos duo on the interior otherwise. Eli Redden from Notre Dame has a near ideal build for a tight end at 6'6", 250 pounds, and quality experience as an inline blocker in a pro-style system, with excellent awareness and timing on combo blocks, brings quality acceleration to outflank linebackers, but it's how he alters speed, nudges guys off, and midpoint zone defenders on sit-down routes that make him an attractive target for quarterbacks, and then he plucks the ball out of the air with strong hands, has the loose lower body to weave around defenders and pull his knees up out of the grasp of would-be tacklers. His upright posture and lack of reps latching his hands does hurt his ability to sustain blocks at this point, where he's more so getting the job done by positioning, and he tore the same ACL twice in a matter of 10 months when he got to Notre Dame, while not reaching the end zone in his only season as a starter. Maybe a tiny bit surprising that they prioritized him over some other positions, considering they handed former Dolphin Julian Hill $50 million over the next 3 years, but he's more of an Austin Hooper replacement probably, and Redden has the potential to eventually be that inline blocker, who can also be a primary receiving option at the position. Now getting to learn from Hunter Henry should be an invaluable experience. Kieran Prunty, the Wake Forest corner, was the first player whose name was announced on draft weekend that I didn't get my eyes on or was even aware of, and I watched at least 2 games and significantly more on most of 330 plus prospects, including the 5 guys New England selected after this. Prunty is 6'1", 190 pounds, with nearly 32-inch arms, 4.45 speed, and an outstanding time in the 3-cone drill, so probably bet on physical traits, where I'm not sure as to why he spent 4 years at North Carolina A&T after being a true freshman starter at Kansas, before going to Wake last year. And then we'll speed things up for the rest of the group, since their evaluations were also pretty much straightforward. Demetrius Crownover, the Texas A&M offensive tackle, is a mountain of a man at 6'7", 330 pounds, without excess weight in the midsection and 35.5-inch arms, pretty tight with his hands and keeps his feet moving to stay connected in the run game, uber patient with his strike and pass pro, because he can rely on his mass and ability to absorb power rushers, but doesn't really explode into contact at all, and ends up in way too many body-on-body reps in both phases, carries his hands low and relies on a fairly predictable two-handed strike, while his feet can lag behind and he ends up leaning into guys. So he was a frustrating watch based on the physical capability that he does bring to the table as a potential practice squad guy as a rookie. Nnamdi Oyaso, the TCU linebacker, diagnoses blocking schemes with high football IQ and plus contact balance as one of the best linebackers in the class at stacking and shedding blocks. That's despite being a former safety, with the eyes and spatial awareness to be a real presence in zone coverage, and brings enough force to grind through one half of offensive linemen as a blitzer. His reaction time and agility to respond to misdirection or the runner changing course are delayed and lead to some bad moments, and his usage in zone coverage was very limited, where his cleats appear stuck in the turf at times. Maybe he can mix in on some rundowns, where they typically rely more on putting an extra defensive lineman on the field rather than the third linebacker. Aaron Morton, the Texas Tech quarterback, is a very rotationally based thrower who pretty consistently follows through, can change up arm angles and really rip the ball. You see the stripe on Morton's helmet move a lot as he scans the entire field with twitchy footwork, and wants to keep plays alive if he doesn't like what he's seeing and the walls are closing in around him. But there were way too many layups on which his receivers had to put in extra work, or can only get one hand on the ball as he allows his base to get super wide. And when plays break down, Morton drops his eyes and takes sacks, or makes some catastrophic decisions, putting the ball up for grabs. An upset bet they hope can replace Tommy DeVito in the very light quarterback room beyond Drake May. Jam Miller, the Alabama running back, brings good vision and that fluidity to smoothly get to openings. With more of a high hip build and flexible ankles, it can be tough to figure out where Miller wants to go, and he slides off some angled shots, has reliable hands, gets low with a wide base, and keeps his head up to swallow the charge of blitzing linebackers and protection. More of a one-speed runner than someone who can threaten defenses with sudden bursts, and doesn't have that extra gear to pull away from pursuit, while his longer legs present the larger strike zone for tacklers. New England released Antonio Gibson earlier this offseason, so Miller probably looks primed to be the RB3, although he never returned kicks at Alabama like Gibson did for them. But behind Ramondre Stevenson and Trevion Henderson, this should be a reliable number 3 who can play all 3 downs theoretically. And finally, Quintavious Hutchins from Boston College, really small for a full-time edge role at 6'2", 230 pounds, and the explosiveness testings at least will make up for it. Ends up on the ground more than you'd like to see, as solid punch per tackles can neutralize him a lot of times, and has no real power element to his rush portfolio, but plays above his weight class when taken on contact, and has the sudden hands to slip off base blocks, consistently first off the ball in passing situations with no wasted steps up the arc, and keeps pass protectors off balance with stutters and shoulder shimmies, which soften the edges for himself. This was after not being willing to pay up for another one-year prove-it deal for K'Lavon Chaisson, now at $11 million as a much higher price tag for him. Maybe Hutchins can provide a couple of snaps where speed off the edge can be an asset as offenses drop back. Am I totally sure about how New England will get the top 2 draft picks on the field, much less maximize their impact early on? No, but I thought the value in both of them was fine, rarer than I thought went about where it should, having that worrisome injury history, but the tight end class overall getting pushed up on day 2. Of course, they were the ones to select the first player I didn't get eyes on late in the 5th round, which seemingly was the case for almost everybody in the draft space, and maybe they can get very minuscule rotational usage from the guys beyond that. So nothing that blew me away, but without wanting to make judgment on a player I didn't evaluate, nothing that stuck out negatively either, just more of a middle-of-the-road draft that I still have to figure out how to exactly make it work. Locking up former Packers wide receiver Romeo Doubs earlier in free agency opened up the board for New England to where they didn't feel like they needed to address the position at all, but I wouldn't have minded seeing them take a swing late anyway, or just get people excited with these players, even if that's certainly not the goal primarily. And the whole AJ Brown situation is still a major piece as we get to June, of course, if he's part of the plans. I just don't know if they're keeping up in the arms race for the AFC, which they were able to navigate their way through thanks to the ever-discussed lighter schedule and some help from the football gods along the way in the playoffs, because the road will be a lot tougher this year, and right now they're dealing with a distraction that looms large over the whole franchise. Let's close things out with the New York Jets, the only team to make 3 selections on night 1, just like 4 years ago. 2nd overall David Bailey, the edge out of Texas Tech, 16th overall Kenyon Sadiq, the tight end out of Oregon, and 30th overall Omar Cooper Jr., wide receiver Indiana. They stick with another Hoosier at pick 50 in D'Angelo Ponce, the cornerback. A pair of 4th rounders, pick 103 Dale Jackson Jr., interior defensive lineman Florida State, and 110 Kate Klubnik, quarterback Clemson. In the 6th round, pick 188 Anis Cooper, interior offensive lineman Miami, and in round 7, pick 228 VJ Payne, the safety/cornerback out of Kansas State. Bailey, I said immediately I was going to be critical of if they just stuck at 2 and picked him there, or someone like Alvin Reese from Ohio State, who may not be as pro-ready on the edge exclusively, but has a much higher ceiling to me, and they could have used off-ball help as well. Bailey's an active run defender who works hard to knock away the hands of blockers and wraps up the ball carrier with authority, but simply doesn't set a consistently firm enough edge with extension and gets washed on by double teams. He combines a big-time get-off with the mobility in his ankles to win around the corner, while his hands have become more impactful attacking the frame of pass protectors, particularly with the starter bull rush. But he doesn't have great actual bend, and too often overshoots the arc, where he simply needs to get stronger with finishing his rush through contact, even if he can't get under the tackle's reach. So I just didn't see a player worthy of going 2nd overall personally. The Jets were part of a rare player-for-player trade, where they sent defensive end Jermaine Johnson to Tennessee for a nose tackle in Rondre Sweat, along with having already exercised Will McDonald's 50 option, and the highest paid addition for agency was Joseph Osai at nearly $35 million over the next 3 years. Looking at new DC Brian Duker, who was with Aaron Glenn as a defensive assistant in Detroit, and then spent a couple of years in Miami under Anthony Weaver, do we see them transition to more of a 3-4 base, with how much they're betting now on edge speed, outside of more of a rundown player in Kingsley Barry, in place of Michael Clemens now moving on for a year, to go with size between the tackles. Kenyon Sadiq, the Oregon tight end, works with good sync at his hips and a wide base as a run blocker, taking care of a variety of assignments on the move. You saw his 4.39 speed and 43.5-inch vertical show up routinely when zooming up the seam and dunking on trailing defenders if they're able to keep or catch back up based on the ball placement. And then he runs pretty low with great balance to make people miss or pull through arm tackles, while putting several amazing hurdles on tape. I don't think he looks particularly natural in a 3-point stance today, operating with too much forward lean and needing to refine his hand placement as a blocker, and he ran a very limited route tree for the Ducks, not showing a whole lot in terms of savvy to alter footwork, use false indicators, and then make sharp cuts to actually separate one-on-one. This was fine value-wise for me, but still surprising considering what we saw from Mason Taylor as more of a detached receiving type from the second round a year ago. Sadiq is more inline utility, but is far from an established blocker at that spot, while it's all up to Jeremy Ruckert, as I struggle to imagine both the younger guys getting onto the field together, and you're not losing anything in the run game, at least on base downs. And they jump back into round 1 for Omar Cooper Jr., the Indiana receiver, from the sub-selection of day 2 in exchange for a late 5th, which actually presents double the value in New York's favor compared to San Francisco if you go by traditional trade value charts. So totally fine with that and adding Cooper, because this is a loose mover who brings quality burst off the ball, fully adjusts his routes based on how the defense disperses, and brings impeccable spatial awareness to go with the intricate movements to find openings, plucks the ball away from his frame with strong hands, and makes some impressive adjustments when the ball seemingly slightly off target, and he instantly becomes a runner with it, showing crazy coordination, contact balance and strength to constantly add those hidden yards. All of his measurements are below average historically for the wide receiver position, and he had the benefit of a lot of free releases in 2025, by Fi's most productive season, and I don't see him snatching up defenders as a blocker to any real capacity. Still, Cooper immediately slots into the number 2 spot in the pecking order to Garrett Wilson, while Adonai Mitchell, who they got back in the Sauce Gardner trade at the deadline last year, offers them the flexibility to leave him primarily inside when they go to 11 personnel, considering they didn't really bring in any veterans of note. If they had simply picked Cooper at 16, I wouldn't have been mad at it either. Sticking with another Hoosier with D'Angelo Pons, the corner. This was after moving up previously. Now they slip back 6 spots here in return for pick 128, before involving that in the trade later, for a player that Daniel Jeremiah understandably compared to his new head coach Aaron Glenn, with almost identical size profiles. Obviously both height and weight at 5'9", 180 pounds are virtual non-starters at the NFL level for an outside corner, with sub-30-inch arms, which could make him a target for back shoulders down the boundary, and that lack of length does show up at times when trying to stay connected in coverage, reach around receivers or keep them at a distance in the run game. But this guy plays so much bigger than his height would indicate, not only battling but dictating terms to wideouts. His change of direction skills, fluidity, and acceleration, combined with a film studying habit to identify formations and tendencies in both man and zone, made him an elite player for an elite FBS defense that went all the way. And he's a physical run defender who doesn't mind sticking his face in the fan, and at a missed tackle rate of just 3% last season. This was after signing Deshaun Wright to a surprisingly affordable $3.5 million for the season, coming off a career year with big-time turnover production, for the first defense in NFL history to not record an interception for an entire season. But would I bat an eye if Pons started over Brandon Stevens, because Gang Green believes Jarvis Brownlee Jr. once again gives them the best chance in the slot, with Pons having almost exclusively lined up outside in college? Not even a little. Then we get to day 3 with Darrell Jackson Jr. from Florida State, just a monstrous nose tackle at 6'6", 330 plus pounds, with massive 11-inch paws and 35 plus inch arms to keep blockers at bay, fully capable of 2-gapping against guards and centers, where he creates a wall for the ball carrier to run into, or reaches out with one arm to halt the momentum. And he brings the balance in his hands to really push around solo blockers in passing situations, with a deadly push-pull move and a sneaky arm over. Yet he won't be able to just get by based on being bigger and stronger than NFL athletes, having to do a better job of IDing plays and countering blocking schemes. And too often, he offered aggressive interior pass protectors access to his chest when quick-setting him, because at this point he doesn't set up moves in cohesive fashion. This makes sense considering the recently acquired DeRondre Sweat was the only true nose on the roster to go with David Onyemata and Harrison Phillips, who can line up there in a pinch, but wouldn't give them that massive build over the center. Jackson is far from a perfect play at this point, but he can definitely give those guys a hard day's of work if he just keeps his pads down. Then we get to Cade Klubnik, the Clemson quarterback, who was considered a potential first-round pick a year ago. The one trade that they made actually that I didn't love, as they moved up 18 spots here, but back 59 from the end of the 4th round with Cincinnati. Klubnik features a tight over-the-top release, capable of rifling curls, or put a ton of arc on deep balls, slick ball handle in the RPO game, and looks very comfortable attacking space in the quick game, with quality field vision and eye manipulation. And he features that quick initial burst to get away from a free rusher, and the wiggle to get around guys that are trying to corral him. gets stuck on his first read too much and lacks the muster behind the ball to get it in there anyway accurately if the timing is off, and he'd benefit from deploying more subtle movements within the pocket, where I felt like he got anxious against quality pass rush units and took plenty of negative plays. So while I don't love spending a pick atop of day 3 on a defined backup quarterback, you understand the limited options available in this draft and how to allow Tyrod Taylor to walk in free agency, because I don't think anyone wants to see a snap of Brady Cook or Bailey Zappi this season. Anderson Cooper from Miami is a massive, well-proportioned guard at 6'6", 335 pounds, with well over 3,000 total career snaps, has shock in his hands to knock back, and then a strong upper body to twist defenders out of rushing lanes, and when his hands are inside, which he rapidly reattaches them if knocked away momentarily, with that wide base, nobody's really going through Cooper. He leads too much with his upper body, his initial strike and pass pro comes in wide and high, and I'd label him a pretty segmented mover. They undoubtedly needed to re-establish depth along the interior line, after allowing both starting guards Elijah Vera Tucker and John Simpson to walk in free agency, but Cooper isn't ready to go, yet I'm not sure about any of the other options on the roster currently. But then I thought they got a big-time steal in VJ Payne, the Kansas State safety, simply based on his elite height, weight, speed profile, with nearly 34-inch arms at 6'3", 210 pounds, and a 4.4 flat in the 40, charges up the alley with gusto, and he's pretty sudden when spotting opportunities to sidestep receivers trying to wall them off, and he's a versatile defender on the back end to survive in single high, drive in routes and quarters, or match up with those oversized wide receivers or move tight ends, where he can truly impose himself. He does blindly step down against token run fakes, and voids his line mark for no actual reason at times, and I'd say he's pretty upright in his back pedal, which delays his redirections, and doesn't position himself optimally to affect multiple routes, too often just covering grass. Yet I thought he had a strong chance to go top 100, which Dane Belton at $4 million and bring in Andre Cisco for just 2.5, now gives them a really cheap safety room around Micah Fitzpatrick, who they traded a bag of chips to Miami for. Can Payne feature into that as a rookie, or maybe as his eyes continue to improve and he earns his stripes on special teams, is he potentially a prominent player for them by year 2? There was even talk about his athleticism translating to outside corner, where maybe a little less is put on him mentally. The Jets franchise tagged and then extended Breece Hall. They brought back Geno Smith to the Big Apple after nearly a decade since his first stint with the franchise. They retained the head coach Aaron Glenn, although we're not going to dive into the politics of that right now. And overall, it appears as if they want to at least compete for a playoff spot this year. Reaching for quarterback at 2 would have been insane, of course, even if Alabama's Ty Simpson went a lot earlier than we had expected for most of this process. And with the ammo they now have, they may have the choice of guys at top of next year's class. Bailey at 2 to me just was never worth it, but I'm happy to be proven wrong. I don't quite know what to do with Sadiq, considering they just picked up a receiving first tight end last year in the second round, but then I love Cooper Jr. as a complement to Garrett Wilson finally, and if there's one size outlier I absolutely want to bet on, it's Pons, who is just enough of a maniac and football junkie that he'll overcome it. Day 3 was all about adding size and potentially finding a long-term backup quarterback, who they'll probably throw out there if things look bleak yet again in December. A little surprising to me as to why they didn't address linebacker at all, since they allowed Quincy Williams to walk, and not putting a lot on Demario Davis's plate, returning to New York for 2 years, $22 million, as a 37-year-old. But otherwise, they addressed all areas they needed to at largely good value. Which brings us to a divisional recap, where I put the Bills at number 1, started off by discussing how much I like Brandon Beane's general approach here, adding a bunch of extra picks and continuing to invest into a defense that is in transition with a new play call on Jim Leonard. Again, would have liked to see a little more splash, and was I personally way lower on corner Davis Nick Benoson? Yes, but I can't agree on everyone, and then it just kept hitting all the way throughout day 3, with South Carolina safety Jalen Kilgore as one of my biggest steals of the entire draft. At 2 I'll put the Jets, which feels a little high considering I just fundamentally disagreed with the selection at number 2 overall in David Bailey, and even have questions about how they might maximize Kenny and Sadiq, but the passing attack just got a lot more potent. They get a favorite of pretty much everyone in the draft, spacing D'Angelo Pons at pick 50, beef up both sides of the line with rotational players that are still developing on day 3, a lot to like there, and then I ended up with a tie for 3rd. Didn't feel like I could put Miami by themselves for 4th, just based on the sheer volume of players that they brought in, including a hefty class of undrafted free agents. Really up and down throughout the weekend for me, where I went, alright, I see you, and then, really? That's the guy you're targeting here? Alternating back and forth, it was wild. I do like some of the upside bets in the middle rounds though, and as I already mentioned, the Patriots had more so a mad draft in my opinion, where it was a lot steadier with a little less to work with. Not as many off-the-wall picks, even though once again they were the first team to stump me with a play I hadn't watched at the end of round 5, but also not a whole lot to get pumped about. There's a scenario where they get 0 starters out of this for 2026 at least, coming off a Super Bowl appearance, but clearly showing flaws along the way. Yet I can also imagine them having impact players at offensive tackle, edge, and tight end with the first 3 selections, of which the first 2 especially inherently are highly valuable. But that's gonna do it for the first half of a Divisional Draft and Roster Review series. Thank you so much for watching this edition. If you enjoyed the analysis and some of the insight I was hopefully able to provide, why don't you leave a like and hit the bell so you know when to tune in next as the NFC South kicks off next week. Do you have any thoughts on these teams or questions overall? Drop them down in the comments, and feel free to also check out my site, hellosofootballtalk.com, and social media outlets as you scroll down to the video description. Looking forward to getting in touch with some of you guys who tune in regularly or just stumble upon my content this offseason maybe. So until then, see you later. Peace!